Welcome, campers. For those of you that haven't had me before, I'm Mrs. Taylor with Studio Ace, and this is day one of your clay camp. For our first project today, we're going to be experimenting with a really cool clay, which is air dry clay. It's one of the easiest clays to work with because you don't have to bake it or put it in a kiln. And today we're going to be creating what you could call a small vase or a pencil holder. And we're also going to be experimenting with texture. So before you start today, you want to look around the house and see if you can find anything that would be really interesting to press into the clay to create really cool textures. Some examples of some things that you might want to try is if you have any stamps. Obviously stamps are awesome. Or some toys, or just anything that has like a cool design on it. I was thinking maybe some dinosaur feet could be really fun. My son loves dinosaurs, especially if I were to make the pencil holder for him. And then just everyday objects like silverware, a marker, or any other kind of pen that might have an interesting cap, because this would create like cool little circle textures. So look around and see maybe if you can find 3 or 4 different things. Doesn't mean you're going to use them all, but you can try them out and you might surprise yourself at how interesting and cool the texture will come out. So let's go ahead and get our work surface set up first. You always want to protect whatever you're working on, whether it's your counter or your table. So like a brown paper bag from the grocery store folded out flat, some newspaper, some just old papers that you're not going to need that you can throw away later, but something needs to be down on your work surface so it's easy to clean up and so you don't damage anything also. So let's go ahead and do those 2 things and then we'll get started. All right, campers, welcome to day 1 of your clay camp. Today we're going to be creating our pencil holder, or you could also use it as a small vase. You just wouldn't be able to put water in it. You just want to make sure that it's going to be tall enough to put some pencils inside. And you have enough clay for day 1 and day 2, so you want to go ahead and separate those out. I just created 2 large spheres. One is going to be a little bit bigger. You need a little bit extra clay for day 1 today. Go ahead and take the smaller one and put it back in the plastic bag so it doesn't dry out. Make sure you have your work surface set up so you're not damaging your table or your counter with some paper or a brown paper bag. You should have a few tools, a popsicle stick, maybe a skewer stick or a toothpick, and the paintbrush that came in your kit. And then you always need a little bit of water nearby just in case you want to smooth any cracks or imperfections on your sculpture. And then I always like to have a paper towel or a towel or something just to kind of help clean my hands as you get going. The most important thing that you're going to need to add to your kit today is something to roll the clay out flat. So you're going to need this for day 1 and day 2. I actually have a large dowel that I use for a rolling pin, but if you have an actual rolling pin that you bake with, that's going to be your best tool. You can also use a really big straw, even like a really fat marker could help. Might be a little bit more challenging, but it definitely will work. But one of the best things I've found if you don't have a rolling pin is a can of fruit or vegetables, because it's kind of heavy and it's round and it's easy to roll. So any of those things will work for you today. I'm going to go ahead and start flattening my clay just with my hands. And I might have a little bit more clay than you have. I always like to start with a large amount, especially in a video, so it's easier to see. You're going to be creating kind of like a large sort of hamburger patty, right? And then as it starts getting a little bit more flatter, it's going to kind of start looking like more of a pancake shape. And you don't want it to go too thin because you want it to be able to support holding some pencils or markers. So once you get to about, I don't know, half an inch or so thick, go ahead and put it on your work surface and get your rolling pin. And I'm going to go in one direction first. And then I'm going to turn it and I'm going to flip it over. You want it to be like a rectangle. So we want it to be kind of long and skinny. I'm getting more of a circle right now, but I'm going to show you how to cut it. So keep rolling it out until it's somewhere in between 1/4 of an inch and a half an inch. You can also, once it gets to this stage, kind of use the table to flatten the clay by just kind of slapping it down. And then that will kind of also help elongate the clay, like so. And so then you can see I'm getting some cracks and things like this. This is really easy to fix with your finger. And then as we start building, we can use a little bit of water to smooth that out. So now I'm gonna go ahead and cut my clay so it's more of a rectangle shape, long and straight. And you can use a ruler or you can use the side of a book or a notebook. And you can use your toothpick or your skewer. You can also use your popsicle stick just to cut off the edge. Cut off one edge. And then I'm gonna look at the side and figure out which side is a little nicer looking. And I think it's that side, because that's the side I'm gonna use to wrap around the front. You can see that. I'm going to cut off just a little bit more on this side and on the top, as straight as I can get it. All right, and then before I put it together, I might just get it a little longer. And smooth out the side that we're going to see here with a little bit of water. I just dip my fingers in the water. You don't want to use too much. You can also do this after you put it together. And then I also want to create some texture. So I talked about this in the intro, so hopefully you grabbed a couple of items. I have a stamp that I could use. I also grabbed a marker, which I just indented on my clay here. And you could practice on the clay that you cut off to kind of see what those textures are going to create before you commit to putting them on your pencil holder. So I have this cute little stamp. So if you have any stamps, that's really fun. I really love circles, so it's always like, oh, maybe this marker will make some cool circles, and then I can just kind of overlap them. You could use a fork or a knife. You could use the end of your paintbrush. You could even create lines with your popsicle stick or your toothpick. So you decide what kind of surface design you would like to create, what kind of texture, and then that's what you're going to put on here. I usually like to put it on first, but you could put it on after you put it together. It's really up to you. I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit on first, and since I'm using a marker, I can always add on later. So you want to go ahead and take all that clay that you cut off, because we're going to smush this or wedge this back into a ball shape, because this is actually going to be the bottom, the base of your pencil holder. So we're going to come back to this after I get this put together. So we're going to go ahead and pick this up. And that side that you smoothed out, this is going to be going on the outside. And so you actually want that to have a little bit of water on it, because that's going to help it stick to the clay. I'm going to put a little bit of water on the inside. I'm going to do my best. It's going to be kind of floppy. I'm going to do my best to prop it up to start to shape my pencil holder. And then I'm just, so you can see it better on the camera, I'm going to go on the side. You're going to be propping it up. If you get any big holes or cracks like that, use your paintbrush or your popsicle stick to kind of smooth those out so they don't get bigger. Make sure there's still water on this side, because that's what's going to get it to stick to each other. I'm also going to thin this out just a little bit. Since you're overlapping, then the clay is going to be double thick right there. So you don't need it to be quite as thick as the rest of it. All right, a little bit more water. And I'm going to go ahead and connect. And you might find you lose a little bit of your surface design, your texture, but that's okay, because you can always add it in. So that's how you're going to connect it, just by adding a little bit of water, applying a little bit of pressure on the inside to kind of make sure that the clay is sticking to itself. And if you have anything like this little opening, you can kind of smooth it out. You want it to be flat. And then just carefully prop it up, because it's going to be very mushy. Get it into that round shape. Like so. And it's really mushy at this stage, but you can be very careful with a little bit of water on your fingers and even your tool. And you can kind of smooth out the edge, right? This is the top right here. And see, this is actually a little thick. Doesn't need to necessarily be that thick. Yours might be a little bit thinner. Like I said, I started with a little bit more clay than you probably will, just so it's easier to see on the camera. You can kind of pinch it with your fingers. You can kind of connect it better where they overlapped. And just spend some time smoothing it out. If it's too mushy and you're having a hard time and you're like, oh man, this is too hard when it's this mushy, then just go ahead and put it off to the side and work on the foot for a little while, or even walk away for like an hour and come back, and then it'll be a little stiffer and then it won't feel like it's going to fall apart. Sometimes it's easier, especially for beginners, to work with clay once it has a little bit of stiffness to it, so don't feel like it's just going to flop. Now, if you want to add any more stamps or texture, you would want to do it within the first hour of creating it when it is still soft. So if you lost any of your texture design and you want to add some more, you just have to be very careful by putting your hand on the inside and then pushing into the clay. If you just push into the clay without any pressure coming from the other side, it'll kind of just cave in. So I'm going to push from the inside and on the outside and fix any little circles that maybe I lost when I was putting it together. I'm also going to take my paintbrush, get a little bit of water on it, and I'm just going to kind of smooth out where I attached it right here, just to make sure that it stays sticking and it doesn't come apart. So while this is having a little bit more time to dry and stiffen, I'm going to work on the foot or the base. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start forming the foot or the base, and I probably won't need this much clay, but I'm just going to go ahead and start smushing it back into that sort of hamburger patty. And then you'll see I won't need it much bigger than that, and that's pretty thick. So I'm going to go ahead and take some of this clay away. And then again, start pouring it into little patty. And then once you get it a little bit thinner, you can start with your rolling pin again. Flip it over. Kind of look at it, make sure it's pretty even thickness. You can go a little bit thinner than that. About 1/4 of an inch or a little bit thicker. And then once you have it thin enough, like I said, about 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch. I usually try to go kind of the same thickness as the holder. And then you're going to be putting it on the bottom. So just take a look at the bottom really quick and make sure it's fairly flat. It should be if it's propped up. And then you can just put it right on top, really gently. And then use your toothpick or a butter knife, or even your popsicle stick would work, and kind of trace it. I'm just going to trace it gently first. And then I'll go ahead and take that off. And then cut it out. And it's going to be a little rougher on the edges, and that's okay. That's actually a good thing. There we go. And then you can even flatten it just a little bit more on that edge so you have a little bit of an overlap, but not necessary. I just like to make sure it's kind of even thickness. Take your finger or your paintbrush and put a little bit of water just along the edge of the circle. Come back with your holder. Put it right on top. Kind of get the shape that you want. If it's not as round as you originally intended, use your popsicle stick to kind of push it out, because it's kind of hard to get your fingers in that very bottom. Make sure it's nice and round or oval. Okay, and then just kind of give it a little bit of pressure. Try to pick it up gently and flip it over. If the top isn't flat, that's okay. You can just hold it while you flip it over, because you just want to apply a little bit of pressure where I added the water and where we connected it to make sure that it doesn't come apart. Now I have a bit of overlap, so I could just cut that off, or I can just blend it right into my container. So like this is quite a bit overlap right here, so I'll probably cut that off, but then the rest I'll just blend. So you just kind of smush it with your finger. It's really soft at this stage. And then you can get it a little bit more kind of even with the rest of it now, or you can wait till it firms up a little bit after it dries a little bit. As you can see, it's pretty mushy, especially because we just added water. So if you want it to kind of feel like it doesn't even exist, you can wait till it's a little bit more dry. You can kind of scrape some of the excess off if you want with your popsicle stick. Smooth it out with your finger. If you lose any of the texture that you created with your stamps, you can always go back in and re-add it before it dries too much. Or redo it, I should say. Smooth it out. This is also a great stage when it's really mushy like this if you wanted to carve your name in the bottom, but you can always do that later because it is still pretty carvable after an hour or two. So you should have like a nice flat bottom. It's all connected, smoothed out. Maybe give it a little tap just to make sure it's flat. Check your texture. If there's any cracks or areas that you're not super happy with, that's when a little bit of water would come in handy. You can always come back and do this, like I said before, after it's been drying for about an hour. It's gonna stay pretty workable for a little while because right now it's pretty mushy and it's gonna move with your finger, the pressure from your finger pretty easily. So if you're having a hard time with it because it's so mushy, just walk away. Come back in an hour, set a timer so you don't forget about it and it gets too dry. So I've got a few cracks that I don't super love, especially towards the back. If you can see that. See those little cracks right there? Now, I can easily clean those up. And I'm gonna show you how, but I would actually wait until it's probably a little bit more on the dry side, just so it can hold up its its weight and it doesn't smush in. But I would just get my paintbrush wet, and then you can kind of put your paintbrush in those cracks and see how it's kind of smoothing it out. You can also use your finger if you don't want to see the brush strokes of the paintbrush. And then if you lost any of your texture, you can go back and reapply it. If you used like a detailed stamp or something, then don't even worry about it, just leave the cracks because you can always kind of paint over it when you paint it too. All right. So I'm just gonna go ahead and leave this to dry now because I am done, aside from a little bit of smoothing of cracks. Here, I'll leave it in the camera's view. So this is one that I already created that's already dry. So you can see the difference. It really holds, right? Doesn't come apart. Still be kind of gentle with it. I didn't put any texture on this one just because I wanted you to see the overall form on the camera. Got a flat bottom. And then at this stage, now that it's nice and dry, it's ready to paint. So once you're ready to paint, you just get out your paint colors, decide on how you want to decorate it. If you want to paint the inside, if you want to paint the outside, you can add design on it. Maybe you decided you didn't want to do texture. You could do your design here on the outside. You could add flowers or your favorite characters or whatever you'd like. Once the paint is completely dry and it's ready to use as a pencil holder or maybe a paintbrush holder or just your tools from all of your Studio Ace art kits. Well, I hope you like this project, and thanks for making art with me.